filming from one of the game rooms of my friend, the local game store, the Game Preserve in Bloomington, Indiana. Today I'm going to tell you about Province. I apologize if the audio in this video, in the intro and the conclusions, is not too good. Maybe you're hearing some echo there, but I had to film here because my house is being remodeled, the basement is being turned into a gamer cave, and there's a lot of noise due to construction going on today. So if I wanted to film, and today is a good day for me to film, I had to do it somewhere else. Here I am, Game Preserve in beautiful Bloomington, Indiana. Province is the game that we talk about today. It was kickstarted, and I think the original edition didn't come with a box, but now the game is available. You can purchase it from the publisher like I did, and it comes with a box. It is a very small game, and it is a small civilization game. There is a small village, or I should say at the beginning of the game there's the potential for a village, or for a village is going to develop into a town, maybe a city. There isn't much around the game here at the beginning of the game. You, as the player, have the job of building structures that will create a business and will make actions around the board, around the village, more interesting. It is a two-player game that plays in about 15-20 minutes once players know what they're doing. It's a small game with actually a decent amount of choices and definitely a decent amount of strategy. So actually, even though the game is pretty simple, at the beginning of the game, early on when players are learning the game, once they know the rules, then they're still trying to figure out the optimal ways of employing the mechanics effectively, so the game may take a little longer to play than otherwise. Once the players are familiar with the game, then it truly becomes a quick filler. Two-player game, you're building a town or a city, depending on how you see things. Province, let me tell you a little bit about the game and how it plays. Each player selects a color, blue or red, and each player receives a set of structured tokens which represent the structures that the players will try to build in this town during the game. This is the board of the game. The town ain't big enough for the two of them, they're fighting to get control of it, and the board ain't big enough for the game. I'm all for portable games. My only complaint about the components of this game, which are absolutely adorable, is that this board is a little too small and it can get crowded easily when there will be more meeples or meeple tokens placed on it. I'll explain how that happens later. So you have these two families, and you have this sort of Mancala situation here with these three spaces representing phases in the production cycle. At the beginning of the game, you place these three meeple tokens on the areas of the production cycle, and later in the game, when a token lands on a space with a hammer, that token will produce a labor point for the player that moved the meeple there. When a meeple moves in that space there, that generates a money, a coin for the player who did that. Each turn, you have two phases. When it is your turn, first you collect resources and then you spend them. When you collect resources, you can move any and all of the meeples that are on the board by one space clockwise. And so if at the beginning of the game you're moving all three, for all intents and purposes, they just stay where they are because the result is still the same. So the default amount of resources that you collect is 2 labors and 1 money. But of course, then you can choose not to move somebody, to manipulate things a little bit to make it so that certain turns will generate more one resource rather than the other. In the game, you can also then add more meeples to the board. There are 2 resources that you're trying to collect. One is coins, represented by these tokens here, and the other one is labor. To keep track of the labor that you collect in a turn, you have this sort of dial here. Again, it's cute, but it would have been more practical if it was a little bigger, and you can just turn it like this. What we do is usually one player collects labor and says out loud, I'm getting a point from here, a point from there, and that the player keeps track of that. We find that more convenient to play. So you're collecting labor and you're collecting money, but why are you doing that? Hey, first collecting money is good. In general, it's the wise thing to do. But then there are also other reasons, because you're trying to build your structures. The cost to build a structure is the one that you see here, and these are the names of the structures that you can build. You can get a bank, a mill, the smithy, harbor, union, village, camp, and lender. Some spaces have arrows that point to other spaces. In order to build a structure in a space which is the target of the arrow, you need to have a structure at the beginning of the arrow. So you need to build the lender first before you can build the bank. You need to build the mill before you can build the smithy. It's pretty simple. You pay the cost that you have. Money stays from turn to turn. Labor disappears, so you have to keep that in mind. You cannot save labor from turn to turn. You spend the necessary amount of labor and money, and you can build a structure there. Hooray! These gems here represent the number of victory points that the structure is worth at the end of the game if you are the first player to build there. So if red player builds there first, the blue player will get a victory point at the end of the game, on top of being able to use the lender ability throughout the game. If blue player then builds a building there, the blue player will have the advantage of the lender, will be able to build a bank, maybe before the opponent does, but will not get a victory point from the lender construction. Another thing that you can do to collect resources is that you can always convert 2 labor points into a coin. There's a reminder for that on the board, which means that if you have 2 unused labor points at the end of the turn, they don't have to get to be wasted. You can use them to get at least a coin. Now, what you're trying to do is to build structures and to create good chains of effects that the structures create for you. The lender allows you to use the ability of one structure that the opponent built and then you do not have. When you use the ability of the lender, you take this token. So you use the ability, which is great, but the lender token is tricky because you need to pay money to then return it to the board, which will allow you to use it later, hooray. But also the tricky thing is that if you have the lender token with you in your area at the end of the game, if you haven't returned it by the end of the game, you have to pay a penalty in terms of victory points. The bank generates 2 coins when you land a meeple on that space, on the space of the coins. The mill gives you an extra labor point each turn, and the smithy an extra one. So if you have both, you get 2 labor points each turn. The camp unlocks the camp meeple, which you simply place on the board when you build a camp. And then if you have a structure in the camp, you can use it, move it regularly, and collect resources for that. So the first player that builds a camp gets to add it and use it. When the other player also builds a camp, if the other player does, which is likely, camp is a good action, then both players can use the token, the camp meeple, move it when it is their turn, and collect resources accordingly. The village unlocks another meeple, which is the village meeple, which works just the same. The union, the ability of the union is that it allows you to collect a labor by spending 2 money. And the harbor is the best one. I don't know if it's the best one strategically in terms of how it works mechanically, but it is the most fun one. It's always the one that I want to have because it's fun to have it. Why so? Well, because this brings one of the only 2 elements of luck in the game. You toss these 2 coins at the beginning of your turn, if you have the arbor, and then you look at this table here to determine the advantage that you receive. If you tossed a white and black result, then you can spend 3 money to build to buy a sailor. The sailor just arrived to the harbor and you can hire it. Then you add it to the board as your own sailor, and you're going to be the only one who is able to use that. If you toss the 2 white results, you get extra labor. If the result is 2 black results, then you get an extra money. It really simulates the unpredictability of what happens in the harbor, the ships that come in, that return, do not return, things like that. The other random element in the game is represented by these gems here. You only use part of the available gems each game. The back is all the same, but the front has different symbols. At the beginning of the game, you make a stack of these gems, then you turn one face up, and that will have a symbol that will indicate the type of condition that you need to meet to be able to earn that gem. In that case, for example, the first player that has 10 coins in their stockpile will grab that token. Or, if a player has 10 coins at the moment in which that is revealed later in the game, that player also grabs the token and adds it to their score pile. If both players meet a condition at the same time when the condition is revealed, then nobody gets that token. When a condition is met, either because a player was able to meet it or both players met it, then you simply reveal the next token. That one, for example, will go to a player that has built 4 structures. Only one player gets that, otherwise it's a tie. This one to a player that will earn 5 labor points in a turn. Things like that. Different gems will give you different conditions that you need to meet, but once you meet the condition, then you flip it this way. It counts as a gem, it counts as a victory point at the end of the game. The game continues until there are no gems available in that pile anymore, or until a player has built all of their 7 structures. At that point you count victory points, which are represented by structures that you built first and gems that you collected during the game. Each gem is a single victory point. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game is the winner. So, in terms of production, this game is really enjoyable. I only had the problem with the board, because things become a little unpractical when you're playing. It is also slightly, I wouldn't say annoying, that as you're playing, you're moving your meeples around, then it's a good idea to flip them if you're not sure exactly what you want to do. You want to move a couple, see the effects, get a sense, then decide what to do with the other ones, but then you have to flip them back up. You flip them just to keep track of the ones that you have used already, then you have to flip them back up. And again, I think that somehow annoyed me probably more than there was a reason for, due to the fact that the board was so small, and then I was always moving unwillingly the ones that I didn't want to move, simply because my fingers are big and the meeples were so close to one another. I'm probably belaboring a point which is minor. I just make a bigger board. Because actually this, per se, as a game, is a pretty good game. Similar to a game that I played and reviewed recently, Agent Hunter, this is a game that feels like it's more than the sum of the parts. It really reminded me in terms of feel of Sail to India, which is also a civilization game that plays a little more than a filler takes to play, but it has somewhat of a feel, of the flavor of larger, broader, deeper civilization games. Civilization games often scare me and they give me a headache, so I don't have anything against civilization light games. Actually, I usually like them. I like Province. Reminded me of Trajan a little bit with the Mancala idea. And Trajan is another one that is a lot to bite and swallow and digest. Definitely, if you don't have the time to play Trajan, but you still want a game that scratches sort of that itch. What would that itch be? It would be the itch of wanting to play a civilization game with a decent amount of theme, while at the same time still having some mechanics which are unusual. They feel a little abstract in a sense, that Mancala idea, but then you realize that can be seen as the cycle of production. So there's a sort of gamey component, gaminess, which results in an unusual mechanic that has its own peculiarities, the challenges, and reasons of interest in a mechanics that is not very common, not commonly attached to thematic games. At the same time, there is indeed a decent amount of theme. decent, maybe. It's a little too much of a word, too maybe excessively benign. There is something thrown in here and there. However, what I like is that the amount of decisions that you have for such a small game, it is still pretty interesting. It holds my interest, the fact that you can choose to go one way or the other. Some decisions seem to be almost obligated, seem to be sort of no-brainer, but none is really an entirely no-brainy. And the game has, I think, a decent balance, an effective balance between luck and strategy. Mainly, your actions will determine quite deterministically the outcome of your decisions, because there is a little luck involved in those. But then there is luck involved in the harbor, so you can choose if you want to have luck or if you want to keep playing airtight. And the gold tokens, actually those can make the game swing quite dramatically, because sometimes there's a token that comes out and it's a requirement that takes a while to accomplish and people do not meet the requirement for most of the game. Then all of a sudden that is fulfilled, you start flipping the other ones and they're fulfilled one after the other, and the stack of tokens decreases dramatically. I've seen more games ending because of the stack of gold tokens was emptied than because the players completed all 7 structures. So there's an element of luck, which I think makes the game a little unpredictable, adds it a little bit of interest without throwing the strategy out the window. I'm probably from this description you had the sense that I'm talking about a much bigger game. I'm talking again about a game that is really minimalistic, really small. It can be a lunch break game, a game to warm up. Maybe for you play Trajan, this is the perfect warm up. It's a good filler. I find it a good filler. That is pretty easy to teach. Some of the things can be counterintuitive, and actually before you start playing the game effectively, it may take you a game or two, which sometimes doesn't happen in other fillers, which are more quote-unquote friendly to the new player, but nothing major, nothing difficult. If you played any middle level complexity Euro game, then you can play this without any problem. Maybe not too friendly for very young players, for children, but other than this, pretty simple, light game, which, however, enough decisions to make it an interesting game to play for serious gamers. Province, light filler, light game, but with enough meat to make it feel like it is bigger than it is. It's like a tofu burger, but that is pretty convincing in sounding and tasting like a meat burger. I don't know if that analogy works, but I think it captures what I feel about Province. It's a good little game.